Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. Hey gang, before we begin, I want to thank everyone who submitted a story after I asked you to submit something about crazy relationships to have a Valentine's Day episode. Man, you guys came through in spades. But I also want to take a second to put an extra warning out there for everyone. Some of these stories are pretty graphic, and some of these stories are pretty intense. Consider this your trigger warning. Check out the titles and listen wisely. Now, leave us not be hasty. Everyone sit back, relax, and enjoy some true scary relationship stories as we celebrate Valentine's Day. Fell for It, submitted by Mitch K. I was 29 years old when this happened, in the best shape of my life, and completely alone. That part always surprises people. I'm 6'2", lift 5 days a week, I'm clean cut, and I've got a really great stable job, and there's absolutely zero drama in my life. Strangers assume I'm swimming in options, but the truth is simpler and more humiliating. I just couldn't find a genuinely kind, normal woman who wanted something real. Every date felt like a transaction. Every one of them had their angles, baggage, which I was not interested in. So when I finally gave in and downloaded a dating app, I promised myself I'd be careful. No rushing and certainly no desperation. And then I matched with Lisa. Her photos were great, but not flashy. She had dark brown hair, warm eyes, and was wearing casual clothes with no filters on the pictures at all. And her bio was short: book lover, night owl, looking for something real. And that line hit harder than it should have. So we started talking, and the conversation flowed immediately. Not flirty garbage, it was like real conversations. After exchanging a few texts and having actual conversations, we found ourselves telling each other childhood stories, our fears, and our goals in life. She even laughed at my stupid jokes, and she didn't seem to be pushing for anything other than a solid relationship. So after years of dead-end dates, this was feeling pretty rare, but good. We kept messaging and talking for 2 weeks straight, and every night, sometimes until 2 in the morning. She told me that she was shy and had had bad experiences with men, and preferred to really know someone before meeting in person, and I really respected that, and honestly I kind of admired it. It sounded a lot like me. But looking back, that was the hook. The first red flag came when I asked to FaceTime. She hesitated and said she had anxiety about being on camera, so she sent a voice message instead. And I kept telling myself, don't be a dick, don't screw this up. Honestly, plenty of people hate video calls. I don't even like doing Teams or Zoom calls at work, so I told myself to just shut up. But the second red flag came when I suggested that we meet at a coffee shop halfway between us. She said she didn't like public places, and that really should have been it. But loneliness had a way of sanding down my instincts until it was smooth and useless. Eventually, she suggested that I go to her place. Just to talk, she said. I somehow feel safe with you. And again, that made me feel good. So she sent me her address. It was in a suburban neighborhood, in a quiet area about 40 minutes from me. I checked it out on Google Maps, and it was a normal house on a normal street. And I even told a friend where I was going, half-jokingly saying, just in case I get murdered, you'll know where the body is. I wish I'd taken that joke seriously. The night I drove out there, something felt off even before I parked in the driveway. The street was darker than it should have been. Only 2 porch lights were on in the entire neighborhood, and there weren't any streetlights. Her house sat at the very end of the street and backed up against woods. When I got there, I texted, "Hey, I'm here," and she texted back, "Come around back, the front door sticks." I hesitated for a second. Suddenly, this seemed a little sketchy, but then I told myself I was being a pansy. I walked around to the backyard and saw that it was very unkempt. Tall grass and a shed leaning slightly to one side were the only things back there. I noticed the back door was already open and the warm yellow light was coming out of the window. So before going in, I called out, "Lisa?" There was no answer. The closer I got to the door, something in the air smelled wrong. It was like this stale metallic smell, kind of like a garage that hadn't been opened in years. But I took a tentative step inside. It was kind of like a living room, and it was empty except for a couch and a single chair positioned directly facing it, like someone had set up a television interview set. That's when I noticed the walls were bare. There were no photos. There were no decorations of any kind in the room. And honestly, there were no signs of anyone actually living there. And that's when I heard the door close behind me. I turned around fast, and the person standing there was not Lisa from the photos online. This was a guy, taller than me, big broad dude. He was balding and probably in his late 40s, and he gave off this smile like he'd practiced this whole routine. He looked at me and said, "Hey, you made it." My body went cold all at once, like someone had just flipped a switch. I was backing away from him a little bit, and I said, "I think I've got the wrong place." And he just said, "No, you don't." Then he proceeded to tell me my name, my job, where I worked out. Details I had only shared with Lisa. I ran for the front door. He moved faster. The downstairs was set up in kind of a circle, so I ran through an empty front room, through an empty dining room, and back into the room that I had just come from. Then I heard the sound of something heavy hitting the floor behind me, and like a metal clanging. I felt a pain explode across my shoulder as I crashed through the back door frame that I had just come through and stumbled into the yard. Then I ran. I should have run for my car, but I didn't. I just started running. I didn't look back. Branches were tearing at my arms and my lungs were on fire, and at first I could hear him behind me, breathing hard and his boots snapping twigs. And then suddenly, there was nothing. The silence was worse than hearing him chase me. I started moving again and tripped, rolled, and then came up near a fence separating the yard from the woods. I vaulted it blindly and just kept going deeper into the trees, not having any idea where the hell I was going. The branches were just smashing me in the face, and my heart was hammering so damn hard I thought it might explode. And then I heard him again. Closer. But I spotted a faint glow in front of me. It was another house whose lights were on. I bolted for it as fast as I could, screaming as loud as I could, this animal sound I didn't even recognize as my own. I burst through the trees and slammed into a porch and started pounding on the door like my life depended on it, because actually I felt like it did. The door flew open after a moment, and a guy started shouting at me, and then lights came on all around. I turned around just in time to see a shape retreating into the woods. I was blathering out why the hell I was there, and the guy just took a good look at me and told me to calm down. He called the police, and an ambulance came too. I had bruises, cuts, and what I later found out, a cracked collarbone. And they told me I was also in shock. While I was being questioned by the police and taken care of by the paramedics, some of the cops went and searched the house that I said I'd come from. Inside, they found an office that had multiple phones in it. There were photos of women pulled from social media accounts plastered on the walls, and they found an open laptop that was still on, filled with chat logs, months of conversations with different men. There was a notebook with a list of names next to the laptop. Some of the names were crossed out, and some weren't. As they looked deeper into things over the next couple of days, they found out that the house had been rented under a false name, and this guy was nowhere to be found. While I was in the hospital, a detective came in, and while the nurses were still in the room, he leaned over and quietly said, "It looks like you're the one that got away." He had brought my cell phone back after they had gone through everything, and I deleted that dating app that night. It's been 2 years since this happened. I still work out, I still look the same, and still get told that I'm quite a catch. But I'm going to be honest, sometimes when my phone buzzes with a new message notification, my stomach drops. And I remember how easy it was to trust a voice, a picture, and a feeling, and walk straight into some guy's trap. Do your homework out there, folks. I didn't, and I barely escaped. The Monster That I Married, submitted by Chrissy T. I married my college sweetheart because everyone said we were the safe kind of love. We met at 19 in a statistics class, and right away he held doors open for me, brought soup when I was sick, even remembered my mother's birthday before I did. He was always gentle in public and thoughtful in private, the kind of man professors praised and parents trusted. When he proposed shortly after our graduation, my friends cried. My father shook his hand like he was handing me over to something solid and good. The first 6 years of our marriage looked exactly like the pictures. He was getting promoted at work, and we were going to lots of fun dinner parties with friends, and we even bought a really cute starter home. A baby boy came, and he had his eyes. That's why no one believed me when the monster showed up. It didn't begin with fists. It began with questions about everything that I was doing and how I was doing it. Like if I was gone for what he determined to be too long, it was, "Why'd you take so long at the store?" Or if I was looking at my phone, "Who are you texting?" And if I wore something that he didn't like, "Why the hell are you wearing that out when I'm not around?" Everything came wrapped in concern, delivered with a soft voice and a smile. If I bristled at anything, he'd laugh and say that I was being sensitive. If I apologized, he'd kiss me and say that he was just worried because he loved me. And after our son was born, though, the questions hardened into rules. I wasn't allowed to go out without telling him. I wasn't allowed to cry in front of him. I wasn't allowed to do anything on my own because he told me that I was always doing it wrong. And his biggest one was, "Don't embarrass me in front of anyone." He never raised his voice in front of anyone else, and the marks he was leaving at that time weren't the kind that were physical, but they certainly were mental. When we went to family functions or parties with our friends, he was the perfect father, bouncing our baby on his knee and making everyone laugh. But at night, when the doors closed, he became someone else. The first time he grabbed my wrist, it shocked me more than the pain. But then him putting his hands on me became routine. I told myself it was just all the stress in our family, the new baby, his pressure from work, and I convinced myself that all marriages have rough patches. When I finally told my best friend that something felt wrong, she just smiled at me and said, "Honey, he adores you. You're just exhausted." And my family said the same thing. My mother pulled me aside one time and said, "You're lucky. Not everyone gets a man like that." And then the gaslighting crept in quietly. He was moving things around in our home and insisting that I'd lost them. He'd deny that we ever had conversations that I knew we had just had. He'd tell me all the time that I was forgetful, unstable, and just being dramatic. But he always kept a calm and steady tone when I cried, which made me look hysterical by comparison. Sometimes he'd stand in doorways without speaking, just looking at me until my skin prickled. And sometimes he'd whisper awful things so softly, I wondered if I just made them up. Was I imagining them? One night, after a really rough argument and the time that he did hit me, I was crying on the floor, and he leaned down to say, "No one would ever believe you. Look at you. Look at the way you act in front of your friends and your family. No one would ever believe you." The physical violence escalated after I tried to leave the first time. I had packed a bag while he was at work, and I was shaking so badly that I dropped my phone twice. Then he surprised me by coming home early and saw my bag. His face didn't change, and that I honestly think is the scariest part. There wasn't any anger, there wasn't any yelling, it was just this flat, empty calm. He locked the door to our bedroom, and I won't describe everything he did. I don't think I really need to. But what matters is this. Afterwards, he held an ice pack to my cheek and told me that he was sorry. But he also told me that I made him do it, and if I ever tried to leave again, he'd make sure that I couldn't take our son with me. I believed him. And after that, for a long time, I learned how to disappear while still being present. I smiled at those family functions, and I smiled at those parties. I lied smoother than glass, even though underneath my clothes I was covered with bruises, and I told myself survival was the same thing as strength. But fear changes the air in a house. I don't know how else to say it, but it just seems to sink into everything. The walls, the furniture. I could feel it watching me even when he wasn't around. I was always sleeping lightly, listening for footsteps, and I memorized the sound of his car from a block away. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night that should have just been an ordinary night. He accused me of flirting with my son's pediatrician. I made the mistake of laughing because it was absurd, and the laughing made him snap. He didn't stop hitting me even when my son started screaming. And at that point, something in me went cold and clear. I saw with absolute certainty that if I stayed, one of us was not going to make it out alive. So the next morning, when he left for work, I immediately took my son, purse, and nothing else and got into my car and drove to my sister's house. I didn't call ahead, I just showed up at her house shaking and bleeding through my sleeve. She listened to what I had to say and then hesitated to respond. "I don't understand," she said. "He's never acted like this in front of us." And that's the minute my husband showed up. He pounded on her door like an animal trying to break through it. He was screaming my name. He was screaming that I'd kidnapped his child. When my sister told him to leave or he would call the police, he kicked her front door hard enough to crack the frame, and I watched his face through the window and didn't recognize him at all. He had spit on his chin and his eyes were just wild. His mask was gone. He was showing his true self. My sister had called the police. The police came fast. There were neighbors who had come out onto their front porches and were watching everything. And my sister stood frozen beside me as he ranted and threatened and then started sobbing and then laughing, and it seemed like he was doing it all in the same breath. That's when I think everyone finally believed me. My parents arrived not long later, pale and shaking, and my mother was crying her eyes out and kept saying, "I didn't know, I didn't know." My father, he wouldn't even meet my eyes. There were restraining orders, and there were court dates, and there were therapy sessions where I shook so badly I couldn't even hold a cup of coffee. And at night, I would wake up convinced that he was in my room standing over me. To this day, he still tells people that I ruined his life. But now, when they ask why I left, I don't have to explain. And they saw him, they heard him, they listen to me now, and they know. And I know this with a certainty that I never had before. The most terrifying monsters aren't the ones who actually look like monsters. They're the ones everyone else trusts. Marianne, submitted by Anonymous. I've been very reluctant to send this to the Campfire crew. I've started writing the story out and actually deleted it a number of times. I'm sure it reads like a really bad story with way too much detail, but I want to get this off my chest. It's true, and it's scary on a level like nothing else I've ever experienced. And all the names have been changed to protect the innocent, etc., etc. I was 24 when I met this woman, and at that point in my life, I thought I was invincible. So, here goes. I was fresh out of college and broke, working a job that barely covered my rent. One night I went to a favorite bar with some friends to just forget how stuck I felt, and just hang out with the guys and feel good for a little while. And that's when I noticed her, sitting alone at the far end of the bar. She was mid-40s with silver blonde hair, something I never found attractive, but for some reason really caught my attention in a good way. As the night went on and we were all just hanging out drinking, I noticed that every time I looked over at her or walked by her to go to the bathroom, she was looking back at me with this steady, confident gaze. My friends noticed too, and my buddy Skip kept saying, "Dude, Cougar Town for you tonight." I laughed and said, "Yeah, right. It's so not my type." But to be honest, I couldn't stop thinking about her. Around 1 a.m., she came over to my group and touched my arm. She was tall and had this really sexy dress on, and she looked me right in the eyes. "You really gonna make me wait all night?" she said. Then she pulled me towards the bar away from my buddies. It wasn't a playful tug, it was a come with me boy kind of pull, and I was kind of taken aback, but also curious. She bought me my first drink without asking. She asked me my name, and I said, "Luke, and what's yours?" And she replied, "Marianne." By that point I was a little tipsy, but she was pretty sexy, and I was thinking with my other head. We small-talked for a bit, and then she stopped and looked right at me point blank. "I like younger men," she said. "You're still so curious about life." I took a moment to register that comment, but she stood up and handed me a piece of paper with her number. "Call me," she said. Again, it wasn't a question, it was a command. I mumbled something back, but she took my chin in her hand and pointed my face right at her eyes. "Tomorrow, we're going out. Just me and you." Then she grabbed her stuff and walked out of the bar. I watched her go and was mesmerized. I finally made my way back to my buddies and told them about it, and they all said, "Dude, go for it." Skip said, "Yeah, go for it or I will." I took a good ribbing that night. But the next day around noon, I called. I couldn't stop thinking about her. She was short and to the point on the phone, too. She told me to meet her at a fancy restaurant in town at 7:30 that night. And I said okay, and she just said, "See you then, Luke." A wave of excitement went over me. And I'd been with lots of girls, had a few serious girlfriends, but something about this was different. It was somehow more exciting, like no bullshit games or anything. I got the feeling Marianne wanted something, and she knew how to get it, and that she would get it. I got dressed up in what I thought was a decent look, a suit and a t-shirt, and drove to the restaurant. She was already in the waiting area looking freaking unbelievably hot. Tight leather skirt, high heels, and I was excited in that way. You know what I mean. We sat down and had some cocktails before eating, and the conversation was the basic getting-to-know-you chit-chat line. At the end of our meal, she smiled at me and said, "I like you, Luke. Let's get to know each other better. Call tomorrow." Again, not a request. She was telling me. We walked to the front of the place, and while I had parked, she had gotten valet service. After a minute, a freaking Ferrari pulled up, and the valet got out. Marianne stood in front of me, and she kissed me, and then her tongue licked my lips. She turned and got into the Ferrari and said, "Tomorrow." Then she drove off, and the valet gave me that "damn, dude" look, and I went to my car. This started our romance. We saw each other nearly every 3 days with calls and texts in between. After a week, she began to text me pictures of her in different outfits, bedroom outfits, and I was getting more and more enthralled, to use a big word. From the start, she spoiled me on our dates. Expensive dinners, she even started buying me designer clothes because she thought I deserved better than thrift store junk. And she always insisted on paying for everything. If I protested, she laughed and told me to relax. "Let me enjoy this, Luke." After the second week, she took me to her house and we had sex for the first time. I'm not complaining, it was freaking fantastic. It felt unreal, and I kept telling myself that I don't know how I'd stumbled into some lucky fantasy. My buddies who knew joked that I'd hit the jackpot, but I ignored this little voice down inside me, telling me how uneven this all felt. Over the next few weeks, we went out a lot, sometimes even with my friends. I will point out right now that I never told my family about her. They never asked anything, and even if they did ask about my dating life, I just said I was seeing someone. Marianne never came to my apartment. I always went to her house. It was this massive place. I mean, she had money. It was in a gated community, a very quiet neighborhood, and inside everything was immaculate. Dark wood, thick curtains, high-end appliances, but there was some artwork that made me uncomfortable, and I never really could put my finger on why. One night, I got up from the couch in a movie we were watching and mistook a door for the bathroom door on the first floor. The door was locked, and I figured it was just to the basement. She said it was when I asked, and I asked, "Why do you have it locked?" She just smiled and said, "Luke, trust comes in stages," and pulled my head to go down on her. I didn't question it again, but I should have. As the months went on, the tone of our relationship shifted. Marianne always was talking about control, about trust, about giving yourself over to someone who, quote, knows what you need better than you do. She framed everything like psychology, not romance. Everything seemed to be about power dynamics, safety, and consent. She often told me that she lived a very structured life and wanted someone who could handle intensity. Well, when she finally introduced restraints into our relationship, she did it casually, like it was no big deal. She asked me to use them on her, and I did. Then she wanted to use them on me, just cords and ribbons at that point. I guess to just use them on the bed. I was reluctant at first, but I was also head over heels for this woman, and I trusted her. She was building that trust she was always speaking about. I convinced myself I was still in control, and one night, we were in the midst of having sex, no kinky stuff, and she was on top. She pulled out something from her bedside table and held it up. It was a ball gag, and she brought it down on my mouth. And this time I did hesitate, and she reminded me of everything that she'd given me when I said I didn't want to do that. She talked about the gifts, she talked about the dinners, the way that she'd taken care of me. She convinced me that I still trusted her implicitly. I mean, there was nothing not to trust. So I let things happen. By Valentine's Day, I was already deeper in than I wanted to admit. It was like I wanted her so badly to be with her all the time, but something in the back of my mind was saying, "Luke, stop now. Just stop." For Valentine's Day, she planned an elaborate night at her place. Candlelit dinner, some wine that probably cost more than my monthly groceries, and something was a little weird when I got there. She was wearing all black, in an outfit I'd never seen her wear before. Long black leather boots, a leather dress, and even these long black leather gloves. After dinner, she stood up and said, "I want to show you something, Luke. Something you'll never forget." And then she led me downstairs into the basement for the first time. The basement wasn't a basement. It was a dungeon. Concrete walls, heavy steel fixtures bolted into the floor and ceiling. There were hooks, chains, and thick wooden structures that looked like furniture but clearly weren't, and the air was cold down there. There weren't any windows. There was just this low lighting and rows of bondage gear on the walls. Gags, paddles, whips, hoods. It looked like a fetish store down there. My mouth went dry. Marianne just said, "Luke, trust me." I told her I wasn't sure, but she kissed my forehead and said, "Love, that's the fear talking. I'll take care of everything." And something in her changed after that. It wasn't subtle. She became unbelievably calm and methodical, like a professional stepping into her role. She led me over to this wooden X and started taking off my clothes, and my brain was screaming, "You fucking idiot, stop, leave now." But I just let her do her thing. She restrained me carefully and efficiently, and for a moment my senses came to me and I told her that I really wanted to stop. She paused and looked at me and said, No, you don't. Now, everyone, I wasn't a prude before all of this and knew some things about this lifestyle. I think I actually picked up the info from some show I saw on TV, and I brought something up for the first time I had ever brought it up with her. What about a safe word? We never talked about that, Marianne. She just said, Call me my love. And she went behind me and then whispered, You don't need a safe word, my love. And before I could say anything, she jammed a ball gag in my mouth and tightened it. Then she came back around in front of me and went down on me. Afterward, she got up and walked across the room and picked up a box. She walked over and showed me what was inside, and I almost shit myself. Knives, pliers, all kinds of really sadistic shit. My wrists were on fire, my legs were cramping up, and panic had crawled into my chest and was just sitting there. I tried to scream out when she picked up a whip and then stood back to look at me. Then she sighed like a disappointed parent. You're breaking the rules, Luke, she said. Do you know what happens when rules are broken? And that's when I realized none of this was play. This was not a mutual exploration, and this was her world. For some crazy reason, I thought about how many other guys she'd brought down here and did this to. I was shaking my head all over the place, and then I saw something on the other side of the room that made me freeze. It was a coffin-shaped box that had bars on the inside with a wooden door outside of that. It was just big enough to fit somebody my size in. All right, everybody, look, this entire story is embarrassing as hell to tell now, and I hope everybody listening isn't taking this as a letter to Penthouse or some kind of red shoe diary. I don't know if I'm getting my fear across at this point, but I was terrified. I saw that box and thought, what the fuck is this? What if all of this was a game to get me down here and now I'm a goner? This wasn't sexy time anymore. This was straight fear. Marianne turned off the romantic music that had been playing and turned on this wicked loud industrial stuff, and it made everything even more terrifying. Long story short, I was whipped past a breaking point. I couldn't see down, but my legs and chest were on fire, and I was sure I was bleeding. The pain was so intense at one point I eventually passed out. I came to and the soft music was playing again. I got my bearings and then noticed Marianne was sitting in a chair looking at me. I looked around the room again, and she laughed and pointed to the box. Don't be afraid, Luke. That's where you'll be staying for the night, maybe a little while longer. Then she stood up and said, Don't get too tired on me, love, and she went back upstairs. I was freaking the fuck out. There was no way in hell she was getting me in that box. I started testing the restraints again and again, and my wrists were getting slick with sweat and blood. And then I felt one bolt shift slightly, and hope flared harder than the pain in my body. I worked at it, every muscle screaming, and when the bolt finally gave enough for me to slip my hand free, I nearly cried out, but I forced myself to stay quiet. My hands were free, with one metal clamp still on my left wrist, but I bent over and pain shot through my body. I fought through it. I got my legs free and went over to the stairs. I looked around for my clothes, but they were nowhere to be found, and I'd left my cell phone in my pants pocket. I staggered over to the stairs, my legs numb, and my heart was pounding so loud I was sure that Marianne would hear it. I looked back at one more minute to see if I could see my phone, but then said, fuck it. I just wanted out of there. The door at the top of the stairs, of course, was locked. I threw myself against it. Again and again, and it gave finally on the fifth hit, and I went slamming open into the hallway. I ran barefoot through the house, slipped on the tile, crashed into some furniture, and I heard Marianne screaming my name, furious and betrayed. I burst out of the front door into the freezing night air and kept running until my lungs felt like they were going to tear apart. There I was, running through a gated community with a ball gag I couldn't get out of my mouth and a piece of metal wrapped around my wrist. I looked back, but I didn't see her. Just my car and her driveway, now like 4 houses behind me. Thankfully, but embarrassingly, an older guy happened to be out walking his dog, and he said, "Son, you okay?" What the fuck, dude? Did I look okay? He told me to stop, and he said he would call the police. He could see how much pain I was in. The cops came out pretty fast, and honestly, at first, they were kind of dicks. They were assuming I was in some kind of kinky game or whatever, and when they got the thing out of my mouth, I finally got to telling them what had happened. One of the cops called for some other cops to come out, and they put me in the back of one of their cars with a blanket and then called an ambulance too. When they went to Marianne's house, I was told later that she was just sitting there, calmly. She cooperated with them and told them that everything was a misunderstanding and that it was just a game that had gone too far. And for some reason, she let them go down into the basement, and I guess that's when the mood shifted. She suddenly didn't answer their questions anymore and lawyered up. And yes, she was arrested, but here's the kicker. None of the charges stuck. Under all the questioning, I had literally fucked myself by being a willing participant to all of this. There were 6 months of a relationship that I couldn't lie about. And Marianne had these hotshot suit lawyers that got her out of everything. My only recourse, I was told, was to sue her in civil court. And throughout all the stuff that went down afterwards, I found out that I was not the first person to go through something like this with her. I learned that she had had other relationships, some that ended quietly and some that ended with restraining orders. One guy, terrifyingly, had basically vanished entirely a few years earlier. There was no direct evidence that she had anything to do with his disappearance, only their relationship and everything she could account for. No body, no charges. My lawyer told me that I was lucky, and I remember saying, "Really?" I was embarrassed beyond belief. Everyone found out. My parents, my family, my friends, even the people at work got wind of what happened. This was 11 years ago, and I'm still in therapy. I ended up moving from Florida to Oregon, and I still have massive trust issues with everyone in my life, including my family. Everyone, I'm damaged goods, and I often think I'm no good to anybody. Shit, I even have a remote job to avoid being near other people, especially women. That "see you next Tuesday" ruined me. For a few years after, I even considered suicide, but I've never done it and I don't plan on it. My therapist keeps telling me it's going to get better, and in many ways it has, but the fact is, that woman fucked me up for life, and I'm sure she just moved on to the next stupid horny kid or guy she could find. Every Valentine's Day, I remember the sound of that door closing behind me on the stairway down to that place. And for a minute, I feel like I'm back there again. I'm back thinking about the time I was that close to maybe never seeing the outside world again. The other day, a coworker Teams messaged me and said, "Trust me," in response to a project we were working on, and I almost wanted to type back, "Fuck you." But I didn't. I even told my therapist I was going to send you this story in an attempt to try to keep moving past things. He advised me against it, but here I am doing it anyway. To Uncle Josh, thanks for reading this if you do. To everyone listening, please don't fall for anything that looks too good to be true. I'm living proof that it isn't. And to Marianne, I hope you rot in hell one day. The Thing in Red, submitted by Mac. My story begins on February 6, 1976. I was 21 years old and fresh out of college. Back then, I hung out with 4 buddies who are still my friends to this day. My wingman, Craig, was the guy all the women loved. He played drums in bands and could carry a conversation with anyone. Another friend, Rich, was often told that he looked like Lindsey Buckingham of Fleetwood Mac, and he used that to his advantage. My buddy Jaybird could make anyone laugh at the drop of a hat, and women found him incredibly entertaining. And then there was me, Mac, just a guy who enjoyed getting out and meeting women in hopes of getting a phone number. On the night of the 6th, we were sitting around a bar having a few drinks when one of the guys suggested heading up to Milwaukee the following week for Valentine's Day. There'd be plenty of bands playing and no shortage of beautiful girls, and we all agreed it was a solid plan. On the evening of February 14th, Craig, Rich, Jaybird, and I headed to a Milwaukee spot called Major Goolsby's. The place was fantastic. The bar was loaded with beautiful women and a live band was playing. It was the ultimate setup for anyone looking to hook up. We were fortunate enough to find an open table and grabbed some beers and started scoping out the dance floor. Didn't take long for the guys to make their moves, and Craig was already deep in conversation with a girl at a nearby table. Rich was out on the floor dancing with a lovely brunette, and Jaybird was eyeing her friends. As I sat there, I noticed a woman in red, a beautiful blonde directly in front of me, standing at the bar and glancing my way. I don't know why I hadn't seen her before. She was right in front of the dance floor. Within a couple of minutes of making eye contact, she walked over to my table and asked if she could sit down. I stood up and said, "Please." I couldn't believe one of the most beautiful women in the club had approached me. I introduced myself as Mac and asked for her name, and without blinking, she ignored the question and asked who I was with. After I mentioned my buddies, she asked where I was from. "Kenosha," I said. "And you?" Still staring into my eyes, she answered, "Everywhere." I glanced at the dance floor and saw my buddies. I knew they had to be envious. I asked her if I could buy her a drink, but she replied, "Why don't we forget the drink and go across the street to my room?" Directly across from the bar was the Hyatt Hotel, and I immediately worried she was a professional and told her I wasn't looking for an escort. I was too young and far too broke. Looking a little confused, she said, "I'd like to get to know you more, and it's loud in here." She was right about the noise, so I agreed to go. And to this day, I don't know what I was thinking, but I'd never had a girl this beautiful want to be alone with me after only 5 minutes. I gulped down my beer and said, "Fine, let's go." As we left the bar, I waved to my friends and they waved back. It was roughly 10 p.m. The walk to the hotel took about 3 minutes, and during the walk, the only thing she asked was how old I was. I told her 21, but when I asked her age, again, she didn't respond. We took the elevator to the second floor to room 200, and upon entering, I noticed the room was strangely bare. There was no luggage, no personal items, just a bed, TV, wet bar, and a standard table and chairs. Uncertain of what was about to happen, I sat on the bed as she requested. She looked at me and said, "Let me get comfortable. I'll be right back." As she entered the bathroom, she left the door cracked about 6 inches, and I sat there with my eyes glued to that opening, heart racing with anticipation. Then I began to hear it. Strange noises and a low chanting that was beyond creepy. It was frightening. I leaned sideways on the bed to get a better angle through the crack in the door, catching her reflection in the large bathroom mirror. And that's when my blood ran cold. As she stared into the mirror, she was no longer a 25-year-old blonde with a model's body. She'd become a gray-haired creature who looked like she hadn't washed since Prohibition. Her face was shriveled and lifeless, older than her grandmother's, and her eyes were solid black. Her arms were so thin and bony, she looked like a walking corpse. I was trembling so violently I couldn't move for the first minute. But finally, I found the strength to bolt, and I sprinted out of the room and towards the elevator, looking behind me every second. I ran through the lobby and across the street as if the building were on fire, and I found my 3 friends sitting near the door of the bar. I just screamed at them, "Get in the car, we've got to go!" They didn't ask any questions. They followed me to the car park just a few feet away, and once inside, they demanded to know what happened. I couldn't speak for the first 5 minutes. I just stared out of the window and shook. When I finally found my voice, I explained the sequence of events. I looked at Rich. "Rich, you saw me from the dance floor. I waved to you. You had to have seen the blonde." Rich looked at me blankly. "Yeah, I saw you, Mac. There was no blonde." I said, "What are you talking about? You guys saw me leave with her. I waved." And they all looked at me with genuine concern. "We saw you walk away from the table, but you were by yourself. There was nobody near you." Then they asked what time I had gone to the hotel, and I told them it must have been 15 minutes after we had arrived. Then they asked how long I was in the room, and I told them less than 10 minutes. "Why does that matter?" I asked. "Mac," they said quietly, "it's 2:30 in the morning. The bar closed a half hour ago. We've been waiting out here wondering where the hell you went." I went into a trance and didn't say another word until they dropped me off at my apartment. The following day I called the hotel. I told them that a woman staying in room 200 had forgotten something at the bar, and when I asked for her name so I could return it, the clerk checked the registration and told me that nobody had stayed in room 200 the previous night. It's been 50 years since that night. I can't explain it, and neither can my friends, but in all those years, they have never once questioned my story. I think, in a way, they lived that nightmare with me. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like me to narrate, email it to unclejosh.truescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. If you're catching this on YouTube and you like what you heard and saw, why not give the video a thumbs up, share it with a friend, leave a comment. I'd love to know what you thought of the stories. It's all free and it all helps out with the algorithms, so I appreciate it. Follow me on social media, and if you'd like to take your support a step further, find a link to my Patreon page in the description, and consider getting some Uncle Josh and Campfire Crew merchandise. A link to my TeePublic storefront is also in the description. Everyone, be excellent to each other, and until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything: a ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.